What is Two-Headed Giant? Two-Headed Giant is an officially sanctioned multiplayer format for Magic the Gathering, where a team of 2 players compete together and win or lose together. Your team shares a life total and tries to defeat another team of 2 players.
Each player has their own deck, their own mana, and their own spells, but the team shares their phases and a life total.
1 upkeep, 1 attack phase, 1 end step for each team. If anyone on a team wins or loses, the whole team wins or loses. While a lot of the rules for Two-Headed Giant are the same as any other game of Magic, having 2 teams compete makes for some interesting interactions. What format of decks do you use in Two-Headed Giant? You can play Two-Headed Giant versions of most formats of Magic. If you play a constructed format like Standard or Modern, your 2 decks must be legal as a single deck. That means that between the 2 of you, you can only have up to 4 copies of any card. But again, that's for playing constructed formats like Standard or Modern. But the most common format to play Two-Headed Giant in are limited formats such as Draft and Sealed. If you play Two-Headed Giant in a limited format, both you and your partner share your card pool, from which you build your 2 40-card decks. You're working together as a team, so you can talk to each other about deck construction and strategies to make your 2 decks work well together. So for example, here are the cards that I opened in my pool and the cards that my partner opened in her pool. And oh, I'm going to actually take this Dynacharge to put in the mono red deck that I'm putting together.
And I'm going to take this Ultimate Price to put in the good deck I'm putting together.
Interesting strategy. Starting a game. Once you have your decks, you can begin playing. Each team starts with 30 life and can take up to 15 poison counters. Two-Headed Giant rounds have only 1 game, so it's not best 2 out of 3 like other formats. Every player gets 1 free mulligan. If anyone needs to mulligan again, down to 6 cards or less, the Scry rules do apply. The team that goes first does not get to draw a card, just like in most other formats of Magic. Each person in Two-Headed Giant has their own deck, their own mana, and their own spells, but the teams share phases. You cannot use your mana to cast spells for your teammate, and you cannot equip their creature with your equipment. The golden rule in Two-Headed Giant is you still refers to you alone, not both you and your teammate. If something would give all tokens you control +1/+1, that only applies to your creatures, not your teammates. You can, however, look at your teammates' cards, including in hidden zones, and discuss strategies with your teammate. You can't pass notes or manipulate your teammates' cards. You and your teammate attack and block together. That means if a card needs other creatures to attack, your teammate's creatures can count. Unless, of course, it says creatures you control. Remember that golden rule. In Two-Headed Giant, you still means you. Any attack or block must be valid as a team to be allowed. For example, if a creature has Island Walk and only one of your opponents has an island, neither of your opponents can block, since that block is not valid for both players. Both players in the team are considered the attacking player or the defending player. The damage goes by default to the main player, which is the player sitting on the right, and affects your shared life total. If somehow the main player can prevent the damage to themselves, the damage can be changed to the other player. If you would get a trigger from dealing damage to an opponent, you can decide to spread out that damage among both players to get a trigger 2 times. For example, if a card had Ingest, a player who gets dealt combat damage must exile the top card in their library, and Double Strike, you can choose to have the first strike damage hit one player and the normal strike damage hit the other player, making both players exile their top cards. Key phrases to look out for. You control. This means you and not your teammate. Each player. There are 2 players in each team, so this would trigger 1 time for each player it applies to. For example, if a card says draw an extra card each upkeep, that would happen only 1 time since the team shares 1 upkeep. If a card says draw an extra card each player's upkeep, you would draw 2 cards since there are 2 players going through the single upkeep. Each opponent. There are 2 of them, so this would trigger 2 times. Deal 2 damage to each opponent would deal deal 4 damage to the other team.
As you can see, this can make for some very tricky gameplay and lots of fun interactions.
Ending the game. Two-Headed Giant ends the same way other games of Magic end. You can get to 0 life, you can get too many poison counters, remember here it's 15 instead of 10, or you can run out of cards. If either player on your team wins or loses, the whole team wins or loses. For example, if one of you runs out of cards, your whole team loses. There is only 1 game each round for Two-Headed Giant tournaments, so when the game ends, the round is over. There is no sideboarding. In between rounds of limited events, you are allowed to use both your and your teammates' pool to rebuild. You can even switch decks. I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. You can help us out by remembering to subscribe, like, share, or even just by leaving a comment. Do you enjoy the Two-Headed Giant format? Let us know in the comments below. See you at pre-release. Just as with rares, the most effective way to store your commons and uncommons is by color and set. Your sideboard must be constructed to the best of your ability in anticipation of the specific deck and decks you will be facing.